Welcome to Chem 101, the Big Picture Podcast, with your hosts, John and Tracy Suchocki.
We're here as your expert tutors, helping you to learn the concepts of chemistry and to recognize how these remarkable concepts apply to modern living.
And of course, there's a deeper story, which is that the very process of learning chemistry holds many benefits, including improved thinking skills. And because we learn best when we learn together, improved social skills too.
All of this we call the big picture. You can think of this podcast as your personal coach. We're here for your support as you journey into the big picture.
At your service.
This is the Chem 101 Big Picture Podcast. So glad to have you on board. Welcome to this first episode of the Chem 101 Big Picture Podcast. My name is John Suchocki.
And I'm Tracy Suchocki. And who is this podcast for?
Everyone who wouldn't be interested in atoms and molecules.
Exactly. Okay.
And if you happen to be a student who's taking a chemistry course right now, you might find this particularly useful.
Excellent. So for chemistry students as well as lifelong learners, here you go.
Okay, great. All right, goals. What are the goals of this podcast?
The first one has got to be to learn the chemistry.
All right, we'll do that. We'll go into the nitty-gritty. We'll also go into just the broad brushstroke main ideas as well. It'll be a review of the basic concepts of chemistry. We'll go into the atomic nucleus, into chemical bonding, into molecular interactions.
Stoichiometry?
Yeah, okay. We'll do some stoichiometry too, all in the interest of understanding the nature of this universe from the perspective of atoms and molecules.
Okay, so then the second goal is applications of chemistry.
Okay, what do we mean by that?
Well, how are we seeing chemistry in the world around us in our everyday life?
All right, so there you are in the grocery store and you see the food, it says non-GMO.
What's that mean?
There you go, application.
It's bad.
No. We got to understand what a genetically modified organism is. Then you can make your decision of whether you want to make that purchase or not, right? So that's the idea of the application of chemistry. Chemistry is indeed all around us, especially in this modern age. And there's an argument to be made that the chemistry made much of this modern age. For good or for bad, look around you. Most everything you're dealing with is made from chemistry. The food you eat, the clothes you wear.
So when we know more about the chemistry behind the products we're using or behind the food we're eating or the medicine we're taking, then we can know the long-term effects of our decisions.
It's important that our decisions be informed. I saw a video the other day on microfibers that was fascinating. You know, the issue of plastics going to our oceans, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So where do most of those plastics come from?
From our water bottles?
Well, what it was pointing out is actually coming from the microfibers, acrylic and polyesters within our clothing.
You mean even those cool new fleece jackets that we wear all winter?
Especially those cool fleece jackets. Okay, so you know the dryer picks up a lot of that lint, but what happens to any lint that the washing machine?
I wish we could figure out a use for that.
Oh, for the lint?
Yeah.
Oh, there you go. There's your home project. But this was pointing out how those microfibers actually go right down the drain from the washing machine, and going from the drain goes to the river, go from the rivers, goes to the ocean, goes into the plankton, building up into the food chain, and right back to us. It's all connected is the point. And so when you're looking at the world from the perspective of atoms and molecules, that lends a lot of insight that's pretty darn important in terms of motivation even.
So applications of chemistry.
But I got to say it's more than just the application of chemistry. I want to emphasize the insight that we get from chemistry too. Insight.
Can you say more on that?
Sure. Okay. Imagine water.
Okay.
From a chemist's point of view, they think of the molecules of water. And we'll be talking about what we mean by a molecule of water. But for now, just hold up your fist.
Okay.
Yeah. Hold up your other fist.
Okay.
Okay. Everyone out there, ourselves here, we're holding up our fists. right?
All right.
Tight fist. Each fist represents, say, a water molecule.
Got it.
So how many water molecules are you holding up?
I have 2.
2. Okay, right. Now, if you have water vapor, you have water molecules that aren't actually touching each other, but they're moving around wildly, occasionally colliding, but on average far apart from each other. Now, don't hurt anybody around you, but move them wildly around your head. Ouch.
Okay.
And what you're representing there are water molecules in the gaseous phase, where each fist represents a water molecule, a fundamental particle of water.
All right.
So you want to know where I'm going with this?
Yes, I do.
Okay, go ahead and shake your fists around. Freeze, time. All right.
Frozen.
So your fists are frozen still because time has frozen, right? It's still a vapor phase. Okay, so now you're looking at your 2 fists.
Got it.
One's a water molecule, the other is a water molecule. Here's the question. What's in between those 2 fists?
I have no idea.
Is it A, air? Is it B, water? Is it C, nothing?
It has to be nothing.
It's nothing. It's absolutely nothing. A lot of students, they think, well, it must be air in between. No. We're looking at the world from atoms and molecules. Down at that level, if there were air in between those 2 fists, you'd see it as another fist of maybe a different color or something. And so the insight you get here is that in between those 2 water molecules, there's nothing to breathe. The vacuum of space, the Starship Enterprise, if it were small enough, would go zipping through. Think of it. If all is particles, then what's that mean? It means there's nothing in between those particles. It's hard to conceive. But simpler to simply say maybe atoms don't exist or they're imaginary. And, this held back the discovery of the atom, I dare say, by centuries. And it was the discovery of the atom that was one of the most important ever. Don't believe that. Just compare today's standard of living to that of, say, 1,000 years ago. And why has the human population boomed only so very recently? We discovered the atom.
Fascinating.
Okay. But I had a student, she came up to me at the end of the semester one year and she said, Coach, I'm never going to forget that. In between 2 water molecules is the vacuum of space. Nothing is there. So the idea is when you look at the rain falling down in a thunderstorm, you have such a different perspective. The number of raindrops in that thunderstorm is a lot.
Particles.
Yes.
Yeah. But that number of raindrops is so small compared to the number of water molecules in one of those raindrops. That's an incredible perspective.
That's amazing.
All right, so it's more philosophical, but come on.
Well, it's trying to grasp at new ideas, expand our minds, and have a different perspective than just maybe what's immediately in front of us at face value. We're looking deeper.
Insight, yeah. So when we talk about the application of chemistry, there's the daily stuff like your laundry, but there's also the philosophical stuff. When you're looking at your natural universe surrounding you, there's a lot to see.
So then we can appreciate our world so much more. I mean, that's exciting.
Not that we don't already, but I would argue that a rose garden is beautiful to anyone.
Yep.
But if you're a botanist, when you walk through that rose garden, you're seeing the relationship between the flowers and the insects, how it is the bees are looking at the flowers with ultraviolet light, and you're seeing the relationships, the intricacy, the level of beauty just gets better.
All right. So it's all about our relationship with our world.
So our goals, 1, the chemistry, 2,
application of chemistry,
with a bit of insight, and then 3.
Backstory. We want to talk about the backstory of chemistry.
Which is, what do you mean by backstory?
When we talk about backstory, we're talking about all the things that we learn while we're learning chemistry.
All we learn while we're learning.
Yeah. So how to learn, analytical thinking. We're using analytical thinking skills when we learn. We're using social skills. We're learning from each other. We can solve problems and ask questions.
I would argue all that has value.
I think so.
So understand we'll be going into the chemistry, that's for sure. But you can also think of the chemistry as the vehicle to higher goals here. You're learning not just about the chemistry.
You're learning about yourself.
Yeah, and how to work with others. You might call it all the meta stuff outside of the chemistry itself, that which you learn while you're learning the chemistry. Watch for that carefully. It's important. It's why people come together for a class. I mean, if you want to learn just the content of chemistry, why not just watch it on a YouTube channel?
You could do that, but then you'd be missing out on hearing other points of view and being able to ask questions and hear answers. And
that's what we're talking about in terms of the backstory. All the stuff that you pick up as you're picking up the chemistry.
Excellent. Cool. So what's the structure of these podcasts?
Okay, so the goals are the chemistry, applications of chemistry, and this weird thing we're talking about called the backstory. And the structure of each podcast, we were thinking we should actually start out with the backstory. And then after the backstory, we'll go into a segment called Do the Review.
All right, so let's talk about the backstory for a second. How are we going to get into the backstory for each episode?
Well, we'll have interviews with interesting people.
Awesome.
We'll talk about learning techniques, specific techniques that will help you do much better on your exams if that's your interest. These are life skills that will be with you well beyond the chemistry course. Yeah?
Okay.
And do the review.
All right, do the review. So in each episode, we're going to go over each chapter.
So this is the first episode. We'll be going over the first chapter of the textbook for this course, which is Conceptual Chemistry, written by yours truly. But I want to make note that if you're not using conceptual chemistry, if you're using another textbook, that's fine. You should find this applicable.
Okay.
And so it's the do the review. We'll be going over the main ideas of chemistry and into the nitty-gritty as well.
All right, quick question. If you don't have a textbook, what can you do? All right, you go to the library.
Oh, you go to the library.
Likely they'll have a copy at your college library, or you can try your public library as well.
Conceptual Academy, of course, has the videos. Oh, we should say something about that.
Okay.
The video is different from the textbook. They don't compete with each other. They complement each other. The textbook is where you can read. The video is where you can watch and listen. I'll have students come up to me and say, hey, coach, the videos are doing so well. Do I need to read the book? And I'm like, just because a format is comfortable for you doesn't mean it's the best learning technique. In fact, it can be the opposite. Learning is not about comfort. And when you push yourself, that's when you're most effective. So go ahead and try those paragraphs. But what you should find in the end is that the video provides the context for understanding those dense paragraphs in the textbook. Hey, I think we're ready for the backstory.
Welcome to the backstory.
The backstory. Woo-hoo! Hey, what's today's topic?
Today's topic is how to study effectively.
Ooh.
Hey, John, how did you learn to study effectively?
You mean back when?
Yeah.
I'm still working on it.
All right.
Oh, no, but you've reminded me of the story of Steve.
Tell me the story of Steve.
Steve, okay, all through high school, no one, I don't think anyone ever sat down with me or my classmates to teach us how to study effectively. I think they just assumed, well, you got a brain, you'll be able to absorb this information and spit it back out on the exam, right?
Mm-hmm.
So there I am in college, and I found my most effective way of studying was to listen to music while I was studying.
Okay.
So I would have my headphones on, and I would open up my organic chemistry textbook, and I would study. And then one day my roommate, Steve, came up to me and said, John, I said, what? He said, why are you listening through your headphones to music while you're studying? And I proudly explained to Steve, well, because if I listen to the music, I can study longer.
Mm-hmm.
Well, he looked at me and said, well, John, because you listen to the music, you have to study longer. And I was like, oh, huh. I mean, no one ever told me that before. Something that's really basic. So I stopped listening to music while I was studying. And lo and behold, I didn't have to study as long, which meant I could study other things, which meant I was more effective, which meant my B's actually started turning into A's.
Awesome. So there are actually ways to study effectively then. Most of
Not
us,
by listening to music.
Right. But most of us will be reading a textbook over and over again, trying to memorize it, trying to integrate, or trying to make it.
Nope.
So what do we do?
Yeah, that's a mistake. You should read the textbook like this, but once.
No way. I would never. I would never get it.
But once and move on. We'll talk about that. But the main thing here is this wonderful book called Make It Stick by Peter Brown and others, et al. We will put that in the show notes so you can have a reference to it.
It's an amazing book.
It's not that long of a book either, but it goes into the cognitive science for the past 10, 15 years. We have learned a lot about how we learn. And this beautiful book called Make It Stick goes into how to learn effectively. And a lot of it is actually counterintuitive. Like I would think listening to music would be an effective way to learn, but it's not. And this book, I only wish I had it when I was just starting my academic career.
Do you think this would be a good book for lifelong learners to read?
It's a good book for everyone, especially in this 21st century where it's all about being able to learn and integrate ideas.
All right, well, tell us about it.
Okay, so I was thinking this is something my students have to read. And the question, do I make it a requirement? This is for this chemistry course, and I was so close to actually doing that. But I thought, even if I did, how many would actually read it? So I condensed it down to 17 pages.
Thank you.
As a review, the main points of this book. And if this article that I wrote, this 17-page article, encourages you to read the book, then I've succeeded in my mission with that article. This article is available to you within the first FYI page of each Conceptual Academy course, and also available to you at conceptualscience.com in our show notes.
Can you describe a little bit about how we learn?
Within that essay, I'm giving a synopsis of the Make It Stick book. However, I've also interjected my own experience with what I call step 1, step 2 learning, which would be important to present here.
Okay, so step 1, step 2 learning. What's that?
Okay, step 1 learning is where you are inputting information.
Okay.
Step 2 is attempting to output that information. You input the information in step 1, and then you try to output the information in step 2. So we call that step 1, step 2 learning.
Got it. Okay, so step 1 is where we're taking the information in, maybe at a lecture.
Yeah, a lecture, a textbook, a video. And notice during step 1, your mouth is typically shut. You're absorbing information. You might have a blank expression on your face. You're working hard on absorbing information.
You're listening.
Yes, and it's important. And step 2 is where you try to articulate that which you think you learned from step 1.
That sounds challenging. How do you do that?
You actually have to open your mouth or pick up a pen. You have to output. And of those 2 steps, guess which one's a little bit easier?
Well, it's like watching a movie. You can just sit back and watch or listen or read.
And actually producing that movie is step 2. So step 1 is absorbing the information. Step 2 is outputting the information. And absorbing information is it's passive. Step 2, outputting the information, is active.
Okay.
Guess what homework is?
Definitely step 2.
Step 1 may feel comfortable. Step 2 is anything but. Step 2 is a challenge. You might stumble. In fact, you probably will. It's so difficult to get yourself to move forward with step 2.
So some of us really like to be challenged. Sometimes the higher the mountain, the more challenging and exciting it is to try it.
I think there's that element in all of us, right? It comes and goes, maybe with a coffee.
Step 2 sounds like it takes effort. It takes concentration. It takes energy.
Let's think of a beautiful lecture. A lecture is very clear and interesting. How does it feel once you're walking out of the lecture hall?
Well, you feel like you just learned something, like somebody just told you something so interesting that you were engaged for an hour listening to them.
You have what I call the warm fuzzy.
Yeah.
The warm fuzzy is like, I got it. I'm ready for the exam.
That was cool.
Yeah. It feels so good that you're fooling yourself into thinking that you're ready for the exam. You don't need to study anymore. You don't need to go into step 2 because you got it, you think. And that's what I call the warm fuzzy. So after a wonderful, beautiful, smooth as silk lecture, you're going to get this warm fuzzy. And you're going to get this sense that you don't need to take it to the next level. But here's the point. Could you, after listening to that beautiful lecture, go up and give that beautiful lecture yourself?
Probably not. You have a good point. They've probably worked really hard on putting that lecture together.
Which is why the young professor preparing his or her first lecture is the one who learns the most.
I remember you going through all that.
Going through your notes and how do I present this exactly? As you prepare for that first lecture, man, that's a learning curve. You give that first lecture with all good intentions and you blow it. But then you do it again and again, and then, and only then, does it come out smooth as silk.
So it takes practice.
Practice.
Is that what you're saying?
It's the doing. Let's go to the basketball analogy. So say you've never heard of basketball before. I don't know where you're from, but you've never heard of basketball before, and you're sitting on the bench, and this coach comes up and explains to you how to play basketball.
Okay, sounds good.
How to dribble, how to make a pass, how to shoot the ball, right?
Warm fuzzy.
Warm fuzzy. And he's really good at describing how to do these things. So do you think you can get on the court and suddenly start playing like LeBron James?
Probably not.
No. You have to get onto the court and actually do it yourself. So sitting on the bench, listening to that coach is...
Step 1.
Going out on the court and actually doing it is...
Step 2.
Yeah, step 2 is the doing. And we learn by doing. We all know this. Step 1 is the introduction. That's important. Don't want to skip it. You need an introduction. Step 2, that's also important. That's where you yourself is the one out there doing it, giving the lecture, throwing the basketball, explaining that which you think you understand from step 1.
So it's really engaging in the things you're learning. I mean, we do that in life all the time.
Right. As we learn things, then we want to go and try it out. Here, give me that ball. I want to go do it. And that's totally natural. And it goes back down to apprenticeship. You would have the master show the student how to do the blacksmithing, and then the student went and actually did the blacksmithing. That's step 1, followed by step 2. It's natural.
That's interesting, though, that you use the mentorship, because then it comes back to having a coach or a teacher guide you, like to help you improve along the way.
Yeah.
So you don't try it out and then become a master. That you try it, you make mistakes maybe, and then you get redirected by your teacher or mentor.
So if you're looking at your instructor as someone who is merely there to present information to you, there's a bigger picture. The instructor is also there as a coach to help you learn that information and integrate that information in a way through which you'll find meaning.
Okay, so maybe ways that you hadn't thought of before.
The instructor is also there to help you learn about yourself.
Yes.
And how to work with others. Because as you are challenged out on that court, you're learning what your strengths are, your weaknesses. You're exploring what you can do. That's important.
That's interesting.
Step 1, step 2 learning, we'll be talking about that a fair amount through this podcast series because it's important. But back to the make it stick, there are specific techniques for learning within that article that we go over, we should review those as well.
Yes, they're very interesting.
Like delayed retrieval, interleaving, mnemonics, calibration. Hey, what's your name?
My name?
Yeah, what's your name?
Oh, come on, you know my name.
Why would I know your name?
We're married.
But do they know your name? Wait, don't tell them.
All right, listeners.
Okay, so I think earlier we mentioned our names, and maybe you remember her name, maybe you don't remember her name. If you don't remember her name, you might be tempted to immediately hit the rewind button and go
rewind.
So what century are we in? To go back to the beginning and find out her name. Or here's a better choice: try your best to remember her name right now. As you do that, you're trying to access information that was placed in your brain. It is there. You need to be able to access it. And there's a connection between your working memory and your deep memory that needs to be strengthened. And what's a good way to strengthen that connection is to actually try to retrieve that information. The process of trying to retrieve that information is how you strengthen that connection. Now, if you just go back to look up the answer, you're not strengthening that connection.
Well, are you reinforcing that connection? Right, because you're repeating it, so then you're starting to reinforce it, so that then you can strengthen it.
No,
that's it's a misunderstanding.
No, it's best to forget something. Say if you want to learn it, it's best to forget it. That's counterintuitive. Say you have a stack of flashcards. You need to memorize a set of 20 facts.
Okay.
Right. Should you go through those cards and memorize it solid cold?
Yes.
Or should you go through that stack and just memorize it pretty good so that it's okay?
I would go for the trying to memorize it solid core. What's wrong with trying to do that?
A better approach, challenge you to try, is to just memorize it sort of good, put them aside, come back to it later, maybe the next day, and try to recall the whole stack. And as you try to recall each individual card, you're strengthening the connection between your working memory and your long-term memory. Now, don't kill yourself. If you can't totally remember one of the cards, sure, go ahead and look it up. But that moment, that time, that struggle, that effort you put out to try to recall that information, that's a strengthening of the connection between your working memory and your long-term memory. You'll find in the book, Make It Stick, refers to that as delayed retrieval. So you learn some information, then there's a delay. Then you try to retrieve that information. And delayed retrieval is overlooked as an awesome way to actually learn information.
You know, now that you mention it, I went to a pretty intense conference about a week ago, and it was a lot of input, a lot of information. And I was worried, that I wasn't remembering all the information because I was excited to use the things that I had learned. And I've been noticing over this past week that the things that I thought I forgot were coming back to me.
There was a delay, and if you could just relax with it. And it's interesting when you have stress, that's like the quickest way to choke off your frontal cortex. That's the thing with an exam. It's stressful for the exam, then that blocks things off. Your performance on the exam is going to go down. When you can relax with it, things begin to flow. So there you are at that conference. It was an intense conference, but you just let it settle, and things naturally percolated back up. And as they did, and as you recalled pieces of information, you started using it, then it strengthens the connection. Now, that's by design. The brain's only going to want to remember that which it needs. So if you don't need that information anymore, it's just going to naturally float away. That's by design. But if it's information that's of interest to you, that you're going to need, that you're going to be using, then you start pulling it back. And that's when the connections strengthen.
Okay, that is counterintuitive. I would want to memorize the flashcards, but actually that probably never really works. So we're talking about studying efficiently. That may be inefficient to try to just drill it into our heads.
And the same thing with a textbook. Students will want to learn the material cold solid, say in a chapter, before they attempt to work on, say, the questions at the back of the book.
So what do you recommend?
Well, you see, the students will say, how could I possibly answer those questions if I don't understand the paragraphs yet?
Yeah, of course. That makes sense.
But it doesn't. It absolutely the reverse. You need to ask, how can I learn the material if I don't work on the questions? It's the questions that step 2 that allows you to do the doing.
So it's almost like asking yourself, okay, what do I know about this question from reading the chapter once? What do I know? What do I understand?
Right, and don't kill yourself. Go back and refer to the paragraphs as you need to. But an ideal strategy is to read through the chapter but once, then go to the questions at the back of the chapter and start answering those questions. You don't need, and actually you shouldn't know the material cold solid before you get to the questions. The questions are there to help you formulate the ideas yourself. It's the step 2.
All right, now I'm going to just venture out there to say that actually, okay, so step 2 is difficult because you're applying, you're questioning, you're digging deep. You may not know, you may feel uncertain, so it's not that comfortable. It's challenging. But on the other hand, that's what could make this actually fun because you're actually doing something now. You're actually challenging yourself and learning about, how you're thinking and
you're engaged.
What resources do you have? Yeah, I think it's fascinating. So that can actually really appeal to those of us that love a challenge.
So should you do all step 1 and then all step 2?
No, it sounds like you're integrating. You're actually breaking it apart and engaging in the 2 steps together, like mixing them up.
We call that interleaving.
Mixing it up is interleaving.
Yeah, so the basketball coach,
okay,
he's going to show you how to dribble, how to pass, how to shoot, how to do this and how to this, and then throw you onto the court or
give you little steps to take at a time.
Right. First, he'll show you how to dribble, and then you go practice dribbling. All right, step 1, step 2. Then she'll show you how to throw a pass.
All right.
Then you go out and practice a pass. So
you're getting drills,
getting drills, and that's how it works. So step 1 and step 2 should be what we say interleaved or integrated, and it's going to depend upon the nature of the material. Some materials pretty darn easy. You're going to have more step 1 than step 2. Other material, like, when we get to stoichiometry, I can show you how to do the stoichiometry, but it's going to go right past you if you're not actually doing it yourself. For that material, you're going to need to do a lot more step 2 learning. But what's important is that as you're learning anything is to look to see what you're doing. If you're doing all step 1 and absolutely no step 2, it's not going to go very well. You need a balance of the 2. And on top of that, the 2 get integrated with each other. And after you sit back and reflect on what you're doing, ask yourself the question, how much of step 1 am I doing? How much of step 2 am I doing? And you can guide yourself.
All right. That sounds really helpful.
Yeah. Thanks, Steve. And thank you, authors of Make It Stick. What a wonderful book.
Are there other techniques that we can use?
Oh, from the Make It Stick book?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, delayed retrieval is just one. There's interleaving. We mentioned that. There's mnemonics. There's calibration. And
what are those? Or do we want to know about those?
Oh, you do want to know about those.
Okay.
Yeah. And please go to that article, that 17-page article, and you can read all about that. Very useful stuff.
I just have one more question. Wondering if this would be helpful to talk about learning from our mistakes.
I think that's the only way we learn. And that's why step 2 is so important, because you're going to make no mistake sitting down and listening to that beautiful lecture. You will make plenty of mistakes when you try to give that lecture. We learn from our mistakes, which is why I favor what I call an encouragement-based homework system. And perhaps we can talk about that in another episode.
Okay, so this is taking us to the backstory again, learning about ourselves. And I think what you're saying, well, learning about ourselves, I think that we can start playing with the idea of becoming more comfortable with making mistakes. So again, this is counterintuitive, like you said earlier, that we really try to get things right. We're really hard on ourselves generally. But if we can become more comfortable with making mistakes, then we'll be more successful in probably everything we do.
That's awesome. So think about it in the classroom. There you are with a bunch of other students. Putting yourself out there and making mistakes it couldn't be better. You're helping not only yourself, you're helping your classmates as well.
How would you be helping them?
You know, when the student raises their hand and they ask this question, you get this palpable sigh of relief. Oh, thank goodness they asked that question because I had that same question too.
And if they try to answer a question and it's wrong?
It's all good.
Okay, because it takes us in the direction, it takes the whole class in the direction of exploring what did we assume, what did we misunderstand, and what is it that we're trying to learn.
It's like there's no going backward. Everything you do is going to be forward.
That's the backstory.
I think it's time to do the review.
All right, let's go.
Welcome to this segment of the Big Picture podcast called Do the Review. This is the time we sit down with a textbook. We'll leaf through the pages, providing page-by-page commentary.
Sounds great.
One thing the Make It Stick book talks about is to throw away the highlighter.
How come we should throw away the highlighter?
The highlighter is there to highlight the most important sentences. The thing is, textbook, they're so dense. Every sentence is important. So you'd end up having to highlight every sentence of the whole book.
Good point.
It defeats the idea of a highlighter. So Make It Stick, they say, throw away your highlighter. Every sentence is important. And also in terms of reading, read slowly for comprehension. This is dense stuff. If you try to fly through it like a novel, it's just not going to work. Don't worry that you're not understanding it with great depth right away. That's not supposed to happen. Rather, as you read through it, you're getting a general introduction. That's step one.
Okay. Do you want to read it over and over again?
You know, as you read a paragraph over and over again, you're going to start mistaking understanding with familiarity. You'll have the familiarity, you'll know what's coming up in the next sentence and all that, but that does not mean you actually understand the material. So it can be deceiving.
Okay, so we don't need to read the chapters over and over again.
Recommendation, read through the paragraphs once, then move on to the questions at the back of the chapter. And as you struggle with those questions, and you should be struggling with those questions, refer back to the chapter paragraphs as needed.
Okay, that's helpful.
Yeah, so you're going back and forth between the two. And as much time as you're spending on the paragraphs, that's about as much time as you should be spending on the end of chapter questions.
Okay, so we're reading slowly. So we spend some time on the paragraph and reading, and then we practice using the questions in the back of the chapter.
Right. And remember the 50-50 rule. As much time as you spend reading is as much time as you should be spending on the questions.
Okay, sounds good.
All right. So here we are with chapter 1. All right, let's pick up a random page. Okay, here we are. Page 11. Okay, Trace, go ahead. Let's practice what we preach here. Read a paragraph.
Okay.
The next thing I'm thinking it's important to point out is the most important question of them all, which is, what did I just learn?
What did I just learn?
Exactly. As you're reading through the paragraphs, periodically ask yourself that question. What did I just learn? And then actually answer that question. In that way, you don't actually have to go to the questions in the back of the book. You can make up your own question. And that own question you make up is, what did I just learn? And you keep asking that of yourself repeatedly, and you keep answering that repeatedly. And notice when you try to answer that, it's not very comfortable. You're not going to want to do it.
Okay.
So let's do that.
Okay.
It shows people how it works.
All right. So we're going to pick a random paragraph.
This one on facts. Do that one.
Okay.
That seems germane.
It is common to think of a fact as something unchanging and absolute. But in science, a fact is something agreed upon by competent observers as being true. Interestingly, what humans accept to be factual changes over time as we... Okay, sorry, I have to read slower. What humans accept to be factual changes over time as we learn new ideas. It was once an accepted fact that the universe is unchanging and permanent. Today, we recognize the fact that the universe is expanding and evolving.
Okay, so it's dense, isn't it?
It's very dense.
Was that difficult to read?
It was difficult to read.
Yeah. All right, so now, after having read that paragraph, the task is to summarize that which you think you just learned. Okay,
so in summary, for example, it is common to think of a fact as...
Stop, you're reading the paragraph again.
I know.
Here, I'm going to close it.
Oy.
Okay. Book closed.
What'd
you just learn?
All right. I learned to ask myself, what did I just learn?
That's good.
Okay, so what did I just learn? So about facts, and that generally we think of facts as something unchanging and true. But in this context, it's saying that facts are based on, an observable agreement by competent observers. An agreement by competent observers.
Okay.
And that actually these facts change over time as we learn new information. And so an example that was given was that it used to be believed that the universe was unchanging.
Fixed.
Oh, you fixed and unchanging.
Yeah.
Thanks for that help. I was just realizing that I didn't remember that word. So it was unchanging and fixed, and now we realize that it is changing and expanding.
All right, how'd that feel?
Well, it was interesting because I noticed where the things that I didn't remember, or that I thought I knew, like what is a fact? It's competent. It's an agreement by competent observers. Mm-hmm. So I had to think about that a little bit, and then I didn't remember the 2 points of the universe. But one is that we know that that's changed, that the view of the universe is changing.
So as you're going through that process, it may not be comfortable, but you can feel learning taking place as you formulate questions. Well, what was that? What was I just learned? And you're so tempted to go back and, look at the book. Yeah, maybe do that, but give it a try to recall that which you just learned. Allow delayed retrieval to do what it does.
So actually, as you practice this more, it does become more comfortable in getting to ask the questions. What do I know and what do I not know? So we can grow in that way personally.
Excellent. Textbooks are dense. You need to be able to spend time with it.
No wonder they put you to sleep at night.
Hey, that's not bad, because then there's a lot of processing going on while you're sleeping. That's another section. But the book is not something to pick up the night before the exam. It's something to put into your daily routine.
It looks like there's a lot of interesting things in here that could be helpful. So just to at least know that they're there well before the exam comes.
You mean the pedagogy of the book?
Yes. What does pedagogy mean? I love that word, and a lot of people don't know what it means.
It's a study of how people learn, and it's how curriculum is presented. Do you say this first? Do you say that first? Does it matter? When you're asking those kind of questions of how to help people learn, that's the field of pedagogy. So, for example, in the margins, you'll often see features such as reading check question. When did modern science begin? Here we are on page 3. So you need to scan through the paragraph to figure out, when did modern science begin? Oh, look, it says modern science began when people first became skeptical of their observations and explanations.
Okay.
And you get the idea that if you're actually doing this with others in a study group, and you can start talking about the ideas that are there, that would be quite useful. So here we are. Chapter 1 is about science. Many textbooks you'll find start out with just a broad general overview of where the book is going. If it's a science book, There'll be the first chapter talking about science in general. I've seen in some textbooks they actually call it chapter 0. You're definitely going to skip over chapter 0. But you'll find exams don't typically go too much into the initial chapter, which I think is a bit of a mistake, but that's the reality of it.
It looks like it's the lay of the land.
Yeah, the first chapter typically provides the lay of the land. You might find parts of it redundant with what you already understand. But as Richard Feynman once famously said about learning, redundancy is a good thing. So if you have the book with you, open it up. Let's walk through the pages together. If you're out and about listening to this podcast, then get ready for a casual review. This first chapter is not particularly heavy, so I'm not sure how important our commentary will be here. But I know in future chapters, there's much more oomph we'll be biting into, that's for sure. But for now, let's just touch lightly on the main ideas of this lay of the land beginning chapter. So here we go with chapter 1, section 1, science was a way of understanding the natural world. Within that section, we go into the wheel of scientific inquiry. That graphic I got from a wonderful article by William Harwood from Indiana University. That is a nice summary of the scientific way of thinking, if you will. And we call it the wheel of scientific inquiry. It typically starts with asking a broad question. So if you're looking at this graphic, it shows a wheel. On the rim of the wheel are different points. Learn what is known, make observations, ask specific questions, document expectations, perform experiments, confirm results, and all that. And there's no one sequence that any scientist will follow. There are a multitude of paths to follow, which makes it an interesting thing to do. But typically, it starts with asking a broad question. You follow through with the next step to whatever you feel what's appropriate. Well, maybe I should go to the library or the internet and learn what's already been known. And then I can contact those people and communicate with them. And then I can ask specific questions. And then I can do an experiment. Then I can make observations. Then it brings me back to wanting to learn more about what is known. There's no one path. That's the wheel of scientific inquiry. What do you think?
So it sounds like it's really about asking questions, learning what's already known, making observations. That's how we learn about science.
The idea is to be as objective as possible, put on your Mr. Spock helmet, and do your best to interpret those results from as unbiased a view as you possibly can. That's the hard part.
It is the hard part.
We all have these frames, which we should talk about in the next episode. From that frame, it colors our perspective, and you don't even know it. But part of this method, if you will, is it needs to be confirmed by others. It needs to be reproducible. That sets it apart from many other areas of human endeavors, like maybe politics. Section 1.2 goes into the discovery of the buckyball. It's really an example of the wheel of scientific inquiry in action.
Quite interesting.
Indeed, some important history here. In many ways, the discovery of the buckyball was the genesis of nanotechnology. Then in section 1.3, technology is an applied science. People often confuse science from technology. They are not the same thing.
What do you mean?
Well, so the technology is there for practical purposes. The science doesn't need the practical purposes. It's just learning how things work.
So it's inquiry.
Inquiry will get you there. Experimentation will get you there. Working with others will get you there.
Making discoveries.
Discoveries, there you go. How the universe is structured, how it works. There need be no practical application of it. Relative to science and technology, you see the two actually work well together. If you know how things work, then you could build things with it for practical purposes. Think of a telescope, for example. Suddenly you have this telescope, which is a piece of technology, that expands your ability to do science. So technology and science, they're not the same thing, but they feed off of each other.
Okay.
Risk assessment,
I think risk assessment is interesting. I've been thinking about this lately, especially in this time where people are battling over so many issues.
So your instructor might go into this notion of the risk-benefit ratio, where risk is in the numerator and benefit is in the denominator. The question might be, should we apply this technology? Then you'll want to do a risk-benefit analysis rather than just a gut feeling. Just go ahead and analyze what all the risks are, spell out what all the benefits are, and look at the ratio of the two. And once you've done that, looking at all the risks, looking at all the benefits and details, then you're in a position to make an educated decision of whether you should move forward with that technology. Case in point, GMOs.
Okay, but like for GMOs, there should be zero risk. Okay, I was pushing you a little bit because I know there can never be zero risk.
Okay. What's the saying? A society that aims for zero risks will have zero benefits. Yeah, thanks. 1.4, looking at facts, like Tracy read earlier, the scientific hypothesis and scientific law, scientific theory. Maybe we should say a thing or two about scientific theory.
Okay.
What makes a theory scientific?
It's based on observation.
Oh, look, it says right here. It's a well-tested explanation that unifies a broad range of observations within the natural world. The thing with a scientific theory is that the theory itself can change. It's not carved in stone. It needs to adapt to what the observations are.
And it has to be tested.
It has to be tested, well-tested, and confirmable by not just one person, but by multiple people.
So you'll see that happen where one group of researchers will look at something and then another group of researchers in another part of the world will use that experiment to see if they get the same results.
Yeah, to confirm it. And the idea is you're trying to prove yourself wrong.
What? You're
trying to prove yourself wrong. If you can prove yourself wrong, then that's a big aha moment, because that's where the quote-unquote scientist will get, oh, this is fantastic. I proved this theory wrong. That's a major achievement.
Okay, so again, you just brought up the backstory of, so we can learn by our mistakes and we can learn when we prove ourselves wrong. These things actually help us move forward and grow. I don't know why they got such a bad rap then, mistakes and being wrong.
Yeah, they're not comfortable. Yeah. Right. So 1.5 goes into chemistry being integral to our lives. We talked about that a bit earlier. It spells out basic research from applied research. Basic research, you want a stronger understanding of how things work. Applied research, that's more in the realm of technology. And a lot of chemistry actually is applied research. Lastly, 1.6, almost there. Scientists measure physical quantities. Now, here's the main thing. A physical quantity needs two things, a number and a unit. Please include the unit. Like, you can't just say you're 3.
Okay, what's a unit?
It describes what the quantity is. If I say I'm 3.
Are you 3 feet? Are you 3 years? Are you 3...
So that years or feet is what we call the unit. It describes what the quantity is. You need to have both of them for the complete description. When you put a number down, don't forget to put the unit down too. The last page of this chapter goes into calculation corner on unit conversion. You know that 12 inches is 1 foot, so there's a relationship between the inches and the feet. If someone gives you 3 feet and you want to know how many inches that is, there's a way to do that, a process called unit conversion, also sometimes referred to as dimensional analysis. It allows you to convert from one unit to the other. So 3 feet would correspond to, you go through the process, you end up with 36 inches. Okay, very good. Yeah, so we've got screencasts on the mechanics of how to do the unit conversion. Your instructor may spend a fair amount of time showing you unit conversion. Why? You'll find later on in the course the unit conversion turns out to be a very key tool to be able to understand the world of atoms and molecules. They're so incredibly small, those little boogers, that we can't talk about them in terms of grams or pounds. We need to talk about them in terms of these other units that are more appropriate to the universe of the super, super small. So that's why unit conversion is particularly important for a chemistry course.
Okay, and then we get to the best part of it all. Reading check questions and think and compare, think and explain.
The think and explain questions are perhaps the most important. These are the ones that you'll most likely find on an exam. Don't expect that the answer is going to be right there at the tip of your tongue. If it is, that's great, but don't expect it to be. It's not supposed to be. It's going to require some thinking and then some explaining. You know, Tracy, it's interesting. Halfway through the semester, I'll have students come up to me. It's only then that they discover the solutions are in the back of the book.
Okay. I didn't know that.
The solutions are in the back of the book. Oh, really? Yeah. Oh, now they're glad they're listening to this podcast. The solutions to the odd-numbered questions are in the back of the book, which makes sense because instructors want the student to do these for homework often. Now, word of warning. All right, I told you the solutions to the odd-numbered questions are in the back of the book. Don't just go to the back of the book and look at the answer without trying to come up with it yourself. I tell you, you'll read the answer, the solution, and it'll make sense. It will make sense to you, and you'll get that warm fuzzy of, oh, I got it. I'm good. I'm going to ace the exam. No, you're not the one who wrote the solution. When you can get to the point where you can come up with the solution, the answer, on your own, that's when you're doing well. That's got to be your goal.
So maybe you have a friend that will be willing to look at your work and correct it in the back of the book and then give you back your work saying, hey, try these couple questions again. You didn't get them quite yet. Or
an even better friend who's willing to listen to you as you stumble trying to articulate an answer to one of these questions. Over a cup of coffee. Hey, I think we did it, Trace. Our first episode.
That wraps up our first episode of Chem 101, the Big Picture Podcast. Thank you so much for joining us.
Our theme music by Zach Jeffrey. All those fun musical flourishes throughout the show supplied by Garth Orr. Production assistance from Greg Simmons. Engineering from CPro Music. For show notes and more, please visit conceptualscience.com. A note of appreciation to all the instructors using Conceptual Academy. Thank you for your support. And to you, the hardworking student, our thanks to you as well. Through your learning efforts, we see the path to making this world a better place. And through it all, remember that one's education is the flavor that remains after all the facts and figures have been forgotten. There's a bigger picture. That's good chemistry.
Good chemistry to you.